From players illegally bending the rules in their favor, to golfers being banned for crossing the line at Augusta, these are the most controversial golf moments in the Masters history. Here we are with a moment that had nothing to do with a bad shot, a rules dispute, or a blown lead. This one happened away from the course after everything was over, and it became one of the most painful footnotes in Masters history. April 1997. Tiger Woods had just won his first Masters by 12 strokes at 21 years old, the most dominant performance Augusta had ever seen, and the first major championship ever won by a black golfer. It was one of those moments that genuinely shifts the landscape of a sport. Fuzzy Zoeller, a former Masters champion, was standing under the oak tree by the clubhouse with a drink in hand when CNN stopped him for his thoughts on the young champion. He started reasonably enough, talking about how well Tiger had driven and putted. Then, he offered some advice for what the reporters should tell Woods when he came in. He said to pat him on the back, say congratulations, and tell him not to serve fried chicken next year. That was it. Sponsors cut ties, most notably Kmart. Tiger was traveling, and it took 2 weeks before he publicly responded, calling the remarks out of bounds and saying he was disappointed. Zoeller apologized many times over the years. A decade later, he wrote in Golf Digest that the experience was the worst thing he had ever gone through in his life, that he had cried many times and that he had received death threats. When he came to accept that the incident would never go away, he was right, it didn't. And then there's a moment from the 2023 Masters that had everyone staring at the same footage and reaching the same conclusion, except the people who actually had the power to act on it. It was the par 5 15th in round 1. Brooks Koepka had just hit his approach, playing brilliantly on his way to a first-round 65. Right after the shot, cameras caught his caddy Ricky Elliott apparently mouthing the word 5 in the direction of Gary Woodland's caddy Brennan Little. And then Koepka himself appeared to flash 5 fingers while removing his glove, which people immediately flagged as another possible signal. Now, the rule here is unambiguous. Sharing club information with a competitor during a round is a violation of Rule 10.2a, carrying a 2-stroke penalty for both parties. Augusta's committee pulled everyone into a room that evening and reviewed the video together. Koepka, Woodland, Elliott, and Little all said the same thing. No advice was given or received. The committee accepted that and released a short statement. All involved were adamant nothing improper happened, so no penalty would be issued. Not everyone agreed, though. Anyway, Koepka won the tournament. The video on Masters.com was later edited, quietly removing the post-shot interaction from the clip. Next up, every time you see those white jumpsuits walking the fairways at Augusta, there's a history underneath them that the tournament itself has never been particularly eager to discuss. From the very first Masters in 1934, the policy was explicit. The golfers would be white and the caddies would be black. Almost the entire original caddy corps came from Sand Hills, a black neighborhood just 3 miles from the course where kids as young as 10 or 12 would start carrying bags at the Augusta Country Club next door and eventually work their way across Rays Creek to the tournament itself. They knew Augusta better than almost anyone. Every break, every wind shift, every green. One caddy, Willie Pappy Stokes, would sit out on the course during rainstorms just to watch how the water ran. Yes, so he'd know exactly where a ball would break on any given day. These men were genuinely irreplaceable. Willie Peterson caddied Jack Nicklaus to 5 of his 6 Masters titles. Nathaniel Ironman Avery was on the bag for all 4 of Arnold Palmer's wins. And for decades, both men were buried in unmarked graves. Avery's headstone wasn't installed until 2017, 32 years after his death. In 1982, Chairman Howard Hardin quietly sent out a press release saying players could bring their own caddies starting the following year. And that was it. The entire caddy corps was gone almost overnight. They got erased like they never existed. The white jumpsuit stayed, their names didn't. Up next, some rules controversies at Augusta are about what a player did wrong. This one is about what the rules got wrong. It was round 2 of the 2009 Masters, and Harrington was in great shape. He came in as the reigning British Open and PGA champion, 2 majors in a row, and was right in contention. He'd just made eagle at 13 to claw back to level for the round, then stepped onto the 15th green with a 5-footer for birdie. Then, a gust of wind swept through Augusta and moved his ball about a foot closer to the hole, clearly caused by the wind, not by anything Harrington had done. Didn't matter. He'd already grounded his club behind the ball. Under Rule 18-2B at the time, if a player had addressed the ball and it then moved, they were automatically deemed responsible. One-stroke penalty, wind or no wind. Harrington called it on himself immediately, replaced the ball, and drained the putt anyway. But the golf world sat back and stared at what had just happened. A man being punished for a gust of wind by a rule that didn't care about the facts of the situation at all. The incident became one of the final catalysts for a rule change in 2012, which removed the automatic penalty whenever there was no clear evidence the player had actually caused the ball to move. Harrington gained nothing from it in 2009, but every player since has stood over their ball in the wind at Augusta with a slightly fairer rulebook, and that starts with what happened on that 15th green. Coming in next. Augusta National has banned a lot of things over the years. Cell phones, running, autograph seeking on the course, outside food. The list is long, the enforcement is serious, and the club does not apologize for any of it. But in 2018, Augusta managed to outdo itself by banning 2 words that don't even mean anything. Dilly Dilly. If you were alive and watching television in 2017, you know the phrase. Bud Light ran a medieval-themed ad campaign where the king of a fictional kingdom cheerfully hollered it at his subjects. It became an instant cultural moment. Football fans were screaming it after touchdowns. Ben Roethlisberger was reportedly using it as a play call in the huddle. And yes, golf fans had started shouting it on courses. Apparently that was 2 words too many for Augusta National. If the patrons heard shouting, it would be immediately removed from the grounds. Meanwhile, Bud Light posted a letter from their fictional ruler, King John Barley IV, declaring the ban an act of tyranny and announcing that 1,000 Dilly Dilly shirts were being dispatched to Georgia. Because if you couldn't say it, you could at least wear it. Next up, possibly the most famous rules controversy in Masters history came down to one casual sentence from Tiger Woods in a post-round interview, round 2 of 2013. Tiger was at 5 under through 14 holes, threatening to take command when his wedge on the 15th hit the flagstick and bounced into the water. He dropped, made bogey, signed his card for a 71, and headed to the interview tent, where he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he dropped 2 yards further back than the original spot to get a better angle. That was a direct violation of Rule 26, which required the drop to be as near as possible to where the previous shot was played. He had already signed an incorrect scorecard. Under normal rules, that's automatic disqualification. Except the committee found a way out. A TV viewer, former rules official David Eager, had already flagged the drop before Tiger signed his card. Augusta reviewed it, decided there was no violation, and let him sign. It was only after Tiger's own interview confirmed the breach that officials had to reverse course. Because the committee had cleared him before he signed, they invoked Rule 33-7, a discretionary clause allowing them to waive disqualification, arguing they'd contributed to the problem by making the wrong initial call. Rule 33-7 was designed for infractions a player genuinely couldn't have known about, like microscopic ball movement, only visible on HD replay. Applying it to a drop, Tiger openly admitted was intentional and felt like something else entirely. Nick Faldo called for Tiger to withdraw. Players were furious. He finished tied for 4th. Dropgate never really went away. Next, here's a story that has nothing to do with golf and everything to do with Augusta being a place where the impossible keeps finding a way in. October 22nd, 1983. It was not Masters Week, just a Tuesday with President Reagan on the course as a guest of his Secretary of State for a rare round of golf. Reagan was near the 16th green when a 45-year-old local man named Charlie Harris, fired from his paper mill job, drinking since morning, and furious about U.S. Steel layoffs he'd just heard on the radio, pointed his 1974 Dodge pickup at Gate 3 and floored it. There was no security on that gate. Harris crashed straight through, drove to the pro shop, walked in with a .38 revolver, took hostages, 2 of them White House staffers, and fired a shot into the floor to prove he was serious. His demand, he wanted to talk to the president. But what followed is genuinely hard to believe. Rather than immediately leaving the course, Reagan decided to try calling the pro shop himself, on one of the first mobile phones ever used. The reception was terrible. Harris heard a crackling voice claiming to be the president and assumed it was a recording. He ripped the phone out of the wall. Reagan was finally evacuated. Inside the shop, the last remaining hostage told Harris they both needed a drink. Harris sent him to find vodka. The man walked out and straight to a Secret Service agent instead. Left with no hostages and no president, Harris surrendered. He served 5 years in prison and died in 2007. Reagan, meanwhile, came back the following morning and finished his round. All right, let's move on. Every April, billions of words are written about Rae's Creek. It is, without question, the most famous body of water in golf. And almost nobody talks about who it's actually named after. The creek carries the name of John Rae, an Irish immigrant from County Down who arrived in Augusta in 1734, 2 full centuries before the first Masters was ever played. By the time he died in 1789, Rae had built an empire. A trading post, a ferry service, a farm, and by 1765, a grist mill along the banks of what was then called Kenyon's Creek. He owned roughly 8,000 acres of land. He was one of the most powerful men in colonial Georgia. His home served as a fortress, the furthest safe house along the Savannah River from Fort Augusta, where residents sheltered during attacks. The creek bore his name in tribute to all of that. But here's what Augusta's official storytelling tends to leave out. John Rae was a slave owner, and in 1771, he was convicted of the manslaughter of a Savannah woman named Anne Simpson. He was pardoned because his friends and associates submitted 2 petitions on his behalf, testifying to his 40 years of service to the province, his membership in the Georgia Assembly, and his unblemished public character. The council unanimously declared him a fitting object of mercy. That's not a story to be actually proud of. Next up, not every breach of sportsmanship at Augusta involves anger or controversy. Sometimes it's just a man who really wants a beer. Ken Green's 1997 Masters was a disaster from the start. A friend accidentally broke his thumb the night before round 1. He shot 87. He was going nowhere. But then he saw the pairings for round 2. Arnold Palmer. Green knew this was his last Masters and his only chance to share a round with the king. So he decided to make it count. Walking up the 14th, he sent his buddy to the concession stand. By the 15th tee, Green had a cold one in hand. He walked up to Palmer, raised the cup, and said this had been an absolute blast and he just had to have a beer with the king. Palmer looked at him and said he should have brought him one too. The tour fined him for drinking on the course, but Green's friend wrote a letter claiming the beer was non-alcoholic and the fine was rescinded. Green later admitted there was absolutely nothing alcohol-free about that beer. Sometimes the best moments at Augusta have nothing to do with birdies. Sometimes it's just a broken thumb, a cheap beer, and the king. Which brings us to this other one. See, Augusta National presents itself to the world as a place of immaculate tradition. Perfect fairways, blooming azaleas, impeccable standards. The man most responsible for building that image was also one of the most openly racist figures in the history of American sport. Clifford Roberts co-founded Augusta National alongside Bobby Jones in 1932, and for 4 decades he ran it like a private kingdom. He was described by those around him as a benevolent dictator, obsessed with order, hostile to anything that disrupted his vision of what the club should be. There's a quote widely attributed to him, sums it up without ambiguity. "As long as I'm alive, all the golfers will be white and all the caddies will be black." For most of his chairmanship, that's exactly how it was. Talented black golfers like Charlie Sifford met every qualifying criterion and were still never invited. It took until 1975, after the PGA Tour finally opened its doors, for Lee Elder to become the first black competitor in Masters history. Roberts was still alive for that, and he wasn't happy about it. 2 years later, in September 1977, Roberts, frail, ill, barely over 130 pounds, had a haircut at the club barber. He ate lamb chops alone in his room. He reportedly asked a Pinkerton security guard to demonstrate how his revolver worked, claiming he'd heard noises outside. Then, somewhere after midnight, he made his way down the sloping drive toward Ike's Pond on the par 3 course and shot himself. He was 83. 13 years later, in 1990, the club admitted its first black member. club Roberts built waited until he was long gone to begin becoming something different. Now this isn't a bad shot, a collapse, or even a rules misunderstanding. This is a fan who found out the hard way that Augusta National does not play around. It was April 2012. The tournament has just ended. Bubba Watson has won the Masters in a playoff. The crowd is clearing out, and for most patrons, it's the end of a perfect week. One last walk around the course, maybe a few pictures, soak it all in. And that's when Clayton Baker had a different idea. He steps inside the ropes, walks over near a bunker, looks around, and scoops up a cup of Augusta sand. Just a small souvenir. Something to take home to his son. Seems harmless, right? Yeah, not at Augusta. Within seconds, security is on him. He's detained on the spot, escorted off the course, and arrested. Because at Augusta National, that sand, it's not a souvenir. It's property. Baker was charged with theft and criminal trespass. This didn't stay inside the club either. It went through the legal system. By the time it was all over, he'd racked up around $20,000 in fines and legal fees. Yeah, for a cup of sand. And just in case you're wondering, no, he didn't get to keep it. Augusta took that back immediately. Because at this place, you don't take anything. Not even the ground. All right, this one isn't about a bad temper or a rules violation. This is about something far bigger than golf. In 1975, Lee Elder became the first black man to compete in the Masters. And he walked into Augusta carrying more weight than any golfer should ever have to. Elder earned his spot the right way, winning the 1974 Monsanto Open in Pensacola, Florida, a place where he wasn't even allowed in the locker room because of the color of his skin. He had to change in the parking lot. When he made the winning putt, tournament officials grabbed him before he could celebrate and rushed him inside the clubhouse. They couldn't hold the ceremony outdoors. There had been death threats. Calls saying if he won, he would never leave alive. It only got worse heading into Augusta. Elder later said he received up to 100 death threats before the tournament. He was so terrified that he rented 2 separate houses during the week and moved between them so nobody could find him. Armed security followed him down the fairways. He wasn't just preparing to play golf. He was preparing to survive. He shot 74, then 78, and missed the cut. It didn't matter. 22 years later, Elder flew back to Augusta to watch Tiger Woods win the 1997 Masters. As Woods walked up the 18th, he stopped and embraced Elder. The man who opened the door got to see someone walk through it. Elder passed away in 2021 at the age of 87. Some moments at Augusta aren't about sportsmanship, they're about courage. You don't hear about players turning down the Masters. It just doesn't happen. But Lee Trevino did it 3 times, in 1970, 71, and 74, right in the prime of his career. At the time, he blamed the course. His trademark low fade didn't suit Augusta's layout, which was built around Bobby Jones's high draw. But years later, he admitted the real reason was personal. He and Augusta co-founder Cliff Roberts had clashed from day one. Trevino went to his office, they had words, and he told Roberts what he could do with his invitation. He didn't come back for 3 years until Jack Nicklaus talked him into it. Even when he returned, Trevino played on his own terms. He refused to use the locker room, changed his shoes out of the trunk of his car in the parking lot. Working-class Mexican-American kid from the dirt lots of Dallas, he never felt welcome inside those walls. He once said that if he hadn't qualified as a player, Augusta wouldn't have let him on the grounds except through the kitchen. Then, in 1989, at 49 years old, Trevino opened with a bogey-free 67 and took the first-round lead, still changing his shoes in the car park, still making his point. Next up, one thing Augusta has never done particularly well is back down gracefully, and 2003 proved that in the most public way possible. It actually started quietly. Martha Burke mentioned at a board meeting that she was thinking about writing Augusta a letter about their all-male membership. Her colleagues shrugged and said fine. She never expected it to go anywhere. What happened next was entirely Augusta's own doing. Chairman Hootie Johnson could have replied privately or ignored the letter. Instead, he issued a 932-word public statement the very next day, turning a private request into a national news story overnight. Women might eventually be admitted, he said, but it would be on the club's terms, not at the point of a bayonet. That 3-word phrase became the whole controversy, and Johnson had manufactured it himself. And the backlash was significant enough that Augusta dropped all its television sponsors like IBM, Coca-Cola, and Citigroup, all of them, to keep them from being dragged into the argument. The 2003 Masters broadcast ran with zero commercial advertising. The protest itself, when it arrived, became something of a disaster for everyone involved. Local authorities confined Burke's demonstration to a vacant field far from the gates, and what actually showed up included fringe groups, publicity seekers, and the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, all of which drowned out the actual message. Augusta held firm. Not a single policy changed that year. 9 years later, Hootie Johnson himself nominated Darla Moore to become one of Augusta's first female members, exactly on the club's timetable.